We all know how important it is to remove stigmas around seeking assistance for emotional and mental health issues. Here, from the Central Valley Community Foundation, from the director of the Drive Initiative, welcome Artie, Padilla.
All right, good morning. Thank you for allowing us to give you a little bit of some information. Artie Padilla, Central Valley Community Foundation. In 2017, a handful of us created the Fresno County Trauma and Resilience Network. We have been doing a lot of trainings, workshops to support CBOs and institutions to become a more trauma-informed, resilience-based county. So we are going to be jumping into a video that's going to highlight one of our community colleagues, Ashlee Hernandez. This video was created by the Department of Behavioral Health, was showcased with about 9 other short clips at the Tower Theater a couple of months ago. Maybe some of you saw those, but it really highlights the resilience that a lot of us have internally and what our community resilience looks like. So let's watch that video. A great story, a story that we're trying to duplicate all over the county with all of our families. So proud of Ashlee. She has, through her work and just through her own leadership, become a strong, amazing example in her leadership in our community. So let's hear from, we're gonna hear from Ashlee Hernandez, and she's gonna be having a conversation with some of our colleagues from the Trauma and Resilience Network. Ashlee Hernandez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I'd like to also invite Dr. Felipe Mercado and Dr. Sheila Thomas to the stage. And as they're getting seated, I just wanted to share how exciting it is to be here for me. It's like a full circle moment, because as I was driving on my way over here, I was thinking, wow, it's been 12 years since I attended Fresno City College. And during that time, I actually was academically disqualified. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart enough to be a student, or because I didn't have the determination or the commitment to finish my education. It was because I had to choose between, do I go to class today, or do I go to work to support myself, to pay my rent? And that was the decision I think many students have to make every single day as they're navigating through Fresno and what we experience, especially when we have histories like my own of coming from a family with a lot of trauma, where you feel as an obligation to support your family network. I'm excited to be here and talk to you a little bit about the Trauma and Resilience Network. And to finish that story, I actually returned because I set a meeting with President Tony Cantu. He took a meeting with me as one of his students, 15 minutes on his schedule. And I had told him a little bit about my story, and he allowed me to return to Fresno City College on academic probation. So for all the faculty, thank you. For all the faculty and the administrators that are here today, I just want to say, take that 15-minute meeting, listen to your students' stories, because you never know what impact you can make, and maybe they can return to tell their story as well. So just wanted to share that little tidbit. So as we're talking about poverty and we're talking about students, I actually have a question for Dr. Thomas. She's been a longtime member of our Trauma and Resilience Network. And our first question is, one of the key issues you've mentioned in the past is the impact poverty and its role in the area of trauma. Can you unpack how that might manifest in our students today?
Thank you so much for that question. So the issue with poverty is it impacts a person on multiple levels, right? So we start thinking about their housing, we start thinking about their food, we start thinking about their transportation, right? And we start thinking about their responsibilities that they have. So when these students are coming into your classes and they're struggling with things like poverty, food insecurity, housing instability, right? They're having to make decisions like how Ashlee was talking about, what decisions they're gonna make and how they're gonna spend their time. So if they have a homework assignment that's gonna take 5 to 6 hours, they're gonna have to decide between doing that 5 or 6 hours on their homework assignment or taking that extra shift in order to cover the bills or buy food. So I think that's something that we can be aware of when we're thinking about the deadlines and if we can be flexible. And there was a speaker who came on before us who was talking about being intrusive, right? So if you allow yourself to ask these questions like, I noticed you've been turning in some things late or missing some things, what might I do to support you, right? And try to be more flexible with things like that. Or even on your syllabus, have like a list of like local food pantries or assistance with housing, just tack that onto the back, right? That way, if students are embarrassed or anything like that, they don't have to ask, it's already there.
I love that idea, yes. Putting those things on your syllabus, and then also just thinking about making yourself open. When we think about that whale that Dr. Carol Goldsmith showed, and she said, kindness, equity-minded, community, those are all things that you can bring to your classroom to help your students become resilient. Okay, so our next question is for Dr. Mercado. As we think about the impacts of trauma and toxic stress, what do administrators and educators need to know about self-compassion and how it relates to their work in academia?
Well, good morning, everybody. You know, when I think about this question, I think about self-compassion, I think about getting onto the airplane. You know, a lot of times when you get on the airplane, they talk about, you know, putting on the oxygen mask. And, you know, your first impulse is always, you know, I'm going to put the oxygen mask on my child before I put it on myself. But what we hear from, you know, the stewardess is that we got to put the oxygen mask on ourselves, because if we can't rescue ourselves, we can't help anybody else. So when it comes to this work of trauma as an educator and as a leader, it's really important for us to understand how to put on our oxygen mask before we go out there and help other people. There's times that we're burnt out, we're exhausted, but the system and even sometimes the way that society is, we haven't really learned how to take care of ourselves. So what self-compassion really offers is a way for us to treat ourselves like we would treat our best friends, for us to really have that voice inside of us, for it to be self-kind. You know, a lot of times, you know, when things go bad, you know, that voice comes on, whether you're a leader or an educator, and sometimes, you know, that voice isn't good. And it's very hard for us to start to think about, you know, how do we start to come down from that voice? And then another component of self-compassion is for us to really start to look at how we don't over-identify with situations, right? So a lot of times when a situation happens, we feel like we're the only ones. And with COVID, you know, we've had this epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And so for over the past 2 years, you know, as human beings, you know, a lot of us have felt, you know, this loneliness and this isolation. And so for us to be able to understand that a lot of people feel like this, and for us to start to find spaces to have conversations, to start to understand, you know, how as a society do we navigate what we're all going through, right? And how do we have the self-compassion to do the right thing? And what self-compassion really is for us to start to understand as leaders and educators that sometimes, even for ourselves, right, we might not have the capacity to help all these things that are happening out with trauma. So that's why we really have to look into, you know, our ecosystems and other different avenues for us to really start to alleviate all the different conditions that we're seeing. But it starts with ourselves first, because if we're not looking internally, a lot of the things that are going to happen externally are going to be bad. So the better that we can look internally and start to change those conditions, right, the better that we can help other people, especially those that need our help the most.
Yes, and especially as we think about working with community college students, right? That's every walk of life in Fresno County, which is amazing to think about. But we also know that that can come with a lot of trauma and a lot of experiences that could feel triggering. So in counseling, we call it transference, and especially when you're feeling burnt out as a faculty member and there's so many things on your list, it's hard to take that meeting with a student and to listen to all of the things. But as you practice self-compassion, that's where you'll find more room, your cup will feel fuller, and you'll be able to serve the full student in and outside of this classroom. Okay, so next we have a question again for Dr. Sheila Thomas. We just heard about self-compassion. Let us extend this to compassion for our students. Please share how those in higher education could have compassion for our students.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for starting off with self-compassion, right? Because when your own personal cup is full, you can start filling up other people's cups, right? So when we're thinking about compassion for others, that starts changing how you're viewing situations, right? So instead of coming to a student and just being like, well, you're failing the class, right? Compassion helps you start asking more questions. Like I said earlier, how can I be of service? What can be done to assist you? What are your circumstances, right? And so when you start thinking about that, you become more effective in terms of helping that student reach their goals.
Yes, I love it. And then our next question is for Dr. Mercado. You have mentioned in the past that educators can build a culture of support. Can you expand with your own experience?
Yeah, I think that as educators and as leaders, right, and I think as educators, right, just because we don't have the title of a leader, you're a leader every day because you're helping other people, find a path. And when I think about this, right, a lot of our work is done in silos, right? A lot of times, things that are going on inside our classroom, as leaders, sometimes the analogy is it's lonely at the top, and we don't have these conversations. Even in our culture, right, we're taught to not have certain conversations, to keep things bottled in. So I think the more that we're able to create ecosystems and spaces where we can be safe and have trusting conversations and to really start to figure out that where there's a lot of common humanity going on, that we're all going through a lot of the same kind of trials and tribulations within a system, and for us to come together and to talk about those trials and tribulations and come with some solutions, right, and get leadership on board and get educators on board, and that's how we start to make a movement. A lot of these conditions, a lot of these circumstances have been in place for years, and it's up to us as people to organize and have conversations for us to change the conditions. If not, the conditions are going to continue to go on, and they're not going to change. So it's really us that we've been waiting for. When they say, we're waiting for the leader, nobody's going to come to Fresno and drop a magic wand and make it right. We're the ones who are going to make it right. And it starts with having conversations with each other and figuring out, the challenges that are going on. And for us to really start to address those challenges, bring the resources, bring the solutions in order for us to have a better community. If not, this is going to go on forever because, it's like Einstein's theory of insanity, right? So that's what I would have to say about that.
Yes, and we have a little bit of time. We thought 30 minutes was going to be short. So Dr. Mercado, you talked a little bit about creating an ecosystem. Can you give us some tips on how to do that? Like, what are some basic things we can do today?
Some basic tips is I know we all have department meetings. So really starting to develop a culture within our department where we can just start talking about different things that are going on, but also bringing solutions. What are solutions that we could bring? I know a lot of times, even I've been guilty of it, when I've been in certain roles that, you see things and you kind of see them a certain way, and it's really easy to get negative. So it's okay to talk about the negative, but let's bring a solution. So let's start to have department meetings and meetings where, we can have discussions where, there's issues, but let's also bring some solutions. And then how do we have conversations here? This is beautiful, right? There's all the state centers that are together. So I know there's commonality that are across the board and, various subjects and various departments. So how do you go from your department now to the larger community? And then from there, right, how do you start to change policy and how do you start to get leadership on board and really start to create these movements? If we're really about diversity and equity, let's start using the words and let's start creating the actions, right? Let's start making things actionable.
Yes. So just curious for you in the audience, how many of you implement trauma and resilience into your department meetings? Raise of hands. Or you have flags, raise of flags. How many of you would like to begin to implement trauma and resilience into your meetings? Ooh, I see lots of flags. Well, this is our plug. So Dr. Sheila Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about how folks can get incorporated into the Trauma and Resilience Network?
Okay. So the Trauma and Resilience Network focuses on building the capacity of organizations in Fresno to reach different people who have experienced trauma. So whether that has to do with violence or being impoverished or having mental health conditions, homelessness, so on and so forth, we aggregate as many community-based organizations as we can in order to start sending out information into the community about those services. And we also provide trainings for those community-based organizations or CBOs about the impact of trauma. So we talk about like toxic stress, we talk about ACEs and things like that. So if you are interested in joining our monthly meeting, I think there's going to be an email sent out after this that's going to have the information for you to contact, and you can come on in.
Yes, and what I love about the Trauma and Resilience Network is that it's so cross-sector. So there is definitely space for education and higher ed. There's also doctors and nurses and community-based organizations. We've even have residents that are involved. So there's definitely an open space for anyone who wants to come and learn. You will receive a follow-up email with our communication, how to get connected. And that closes up the end for us. Thank you so much for your time. Please stay connected.
Take care.